And we're with Alan Silow, the Executive Director of Santa Rosa Symphony. Did I say that right?
That's right.
Santa Rosa Symphony Orchestra or Santa Rosa Symphony?
Santa Rosa Symphony.
That's excellent. When did you start with the symphony?
Santa Rosa?
Yeah.
July of 2002.
Okay, so you're relatively fresh, given a decade
Fresh,
or so.
13 years. Most executive directors either burnt out or are asked to travel on after a few years. So
Is that with the symphony or with the ED sort of journeyman mentality?
No, I think it can be a high-stress position, so it maybe goes both ways. I think I'm now the longest seated executive director of an orchestra in California, actually.
Wow. And then you're going to go for the national goal, you know, like longest in the nation for...
Oh, I don't know about that.
Well, what's the life cycle of an executive director? I mean, how did you get into this game? Has it always been arts?
No, in fact, far from it, actually. You know, I know that there are some people that at a young age said, this is what I know I want to do, and they've just had that clarity and gone for it. That's never been my goal, so to speak. So I came from it sort of from the nonprofit management point of view.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And was this was that the career sort of rubric under which you began, or?
Well, no, the rubric came during my academic career.
I was going to say, yeah. So you grew up in New York.
I grew up in New York City.
Did you study there, or?
Only high school. I left after high school.
Okay.
And quickly studied at University of Wisconsin in Madison for an undergraduate degree in economics, and then went on to Princeton Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs for a master's in public administration.
Yeah.
And so I sort of grew up in the post-Kennedy era, and so I think I was very oriented towards wanting to be part of a public sector contribution and making a difference.
I was going to say, you're of that generation where like public service,
right?
You know, ask not what, you know.
Exactly. It was very much in vogue, and it's something that Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School was very much all about.
Yeah, and that's a high caliber school. I mean,
it is a high caliber school. Yeah. It was a rather humbling experience, intellectually speaking, and so I had that sort of desire to make a difference without it being very specific in terms of the particular industry or sector.
So where did you go first after graduation?
I backpacked through Europe. That was, you know,
also of that generation.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, wow, I've been studying my whole life. Before I get serious, I better go out and have a good time.
That's great.
So I backpacked through Europe for about 6 months, which was great.
That's wonderful.
And then, you know, I decided, since I've been in East Coast most of my adult life, I decided I wanted to come out west.
Yeah.
And I remember being interviewed by the General Accounting Office, which is a federal agency, and they offered me a position. And they said, well, it would be in Washington, D.C., because that's the headquarters, so to speak, and that's where it's all happening. I said, don't you have a regional office in San Francisco? They said, yes. I said, oh, I'd like to go there. They said, well, no, that's just a regional office. I said, that's okay. I'd like to be in San Francisco.
I was going to say, the city's much more sexy than D.C. after Europe.
Yeah,
right? Okay,
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where I started. And my career took a lot of different directions. First, it went back to academia.
By design or through necessity? I mean, did you get kicked out, or did you?
No. There was a point in my career I was kicked out, and I can mention that as we always continue, but not there. No, there I chose to leave, again, because I felt, you know, when I was in the federal government, great people, but so many of them was all, let's just put in our time, you know, put in our 20, 30 years, and then retire, have a pension, and I just thought there was more to life than that.
I was going to say, you seem intrinsically more dynamic.
Right.
Yeah.
So I left that and, you know, did a number of different things along the way, but to bring it up to speed with where I am now, eventually my wife and I took a vacation to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Okay. And I was at the time teaching at San Diego State University and fell in love with Santa Fe. Because prior to that, my wife is German born, and so we had lived in Munich together for a year.
And had you been there before? I mean, you lived there? No. When you traveled, did you at least visit Germany?
Oh yeah. I had visited Germany, but not lived there. Okay. And she grew up in Bavaria, not far, and so we went there for a year, and I worked for Siemens AG, doing intercultural communication seminars for their folks. So anyway, we came back to the States, and I discovered Santa Fe. And fell in love with Santa Fe as a wonderful combination of, obviously in the United States, but also has a real European, historical rooted.
Interesting. Yeah. Big expat community there.
Yeah. And so, well, it's not expat, it is in the United States.
No, I mean like expats from Europe.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Oh, right,
yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. No, the reason I thought you might think that, my mother, when I told her we were moving to New Mexico, her response on the phone was, "Aren't you worried about the water?"
Oh, because
And
you thought it was
I went,
Mexico.
Mom, really, it's not Mexico. This is New Mexico, and people are a little sensitive in New Mexico about that, about
Right.
being seen as not part of the
So
country.
just to clarify, New Mexico is a state. In the
That's exactly right.
No, I mean, but a lot of European artists.
That's right.
Yeah,
a lot of European artists. That's right. You understand. You know that story. Yeah. So you know, from an East Coast point of view, you know, a lot of people think culture ends west of the Hudson River. So you know, it took a while for them to understand. And
but what was it about New Mexico that? I mean, was it the community? Was it the art? I mean, it's a stunning place.
Yeah, it is a stunning place. Well, first of all, visually, it's extraordinarily beautiful, and because of the adobe architecture, it also has a very unique style to it. But I found it was, you know, a small town. You know, at the time, only maybe about 75,000 people. But I remember walking into a coffee shop, and they had a newsstand with magazines from Paris and from London and from New York, and so there was a very sophisticated group of people there, very dedicated to sort of worldly events and culture.
Right.
And so I found it a very attractive combination. It's still a small town, but you know, wonderfully sophisticated.
That cosmopolitan
exactly.
sense of being. Yeah.
And Santa Fe is the kind of place where it either opens its arms. A lot of people come there and decide, I'm dropping everything, I'm moving there, without a doubt. But it either opens its arms to you or it closes its doors. And for me, it opened its arms to me. And so shortly after, you know, I got involved in tourism. Yeah. And I remember being interviewed by the Convention Visitors Bureau, you know, when I was first applied there as a director of marketing, and they said, you've never done tourism marketing before. They said, why would you be interested in? And I think they were sort of taken aback by my sort of transparent answer. I said, because that's what the game is here. It's all about tourism in Santa Fe. I mean, what else are you going to apply for? So I got hired there, and within 6 months I became the executive director, to make a long story short, and I was appointed by the mayor, so I got involved in politics fairly quickly there.
Was this part of a Machiavellian plan, or just the way it worked out?
As I said before, I haven't had any particular plan, you know. It's all sort of evolved.
That's why you're dangerous.
It's all sort of evolved, you know, and so I just have to trust that there's something greater than me is a guiding hand in all this.
Fair enough. Okay, we're with Alan Silow, the executive director of the Santa Rosa Symphony, and we'll be right back. We're back with Alan Silow, the executive director of Santa Rosa Symphony. We left off talking about your rise to the executive director of a tourism bureau then in New Mexico in Santa Fe. How did you get back to California and the Bay Area and bring your newfound prowess as an ED to the fore?
Is this for an hour, this interview? Because I'll give you the cliff notes.
There's a time warp.
I'll give you the cliff notes on it, okay? So anyway, so I did that for about 7 years and loved it, really enjoyed it. And as part of that experience, I got to know people in the arts, because arts is a big part of what happens in Santa Fe. Yeah. With the Santa Fe Opera, the Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival, third largest center for art galleries in the country.
Now, you strike me as a rather cultured guy. Were you not invested in the arts personally prior to that?
Well, I wasn't a collector, that's for sure.
Right, okay.
But I was attracted to the arts, although I hadn't grown up as a musician or learning a musical instrument. Okay. And so after that mayor's term was up, there was a new one elected who I was not in support of, and so she found someone to take my position. And that, quote, let go was a real opportunity. Yeah. And I was approached by the Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival, and I went to work for them, and it was a wonderful breath of fresh air, in a sense, in terms of the change of focus and commitment, and finding people just so passionate about particular topics such as chamber music, classical music.
And I would imagine you brought that with you back to the Bay Area, that passion for music.
Exactly, and so I started to really learn a lot about classical music and got to know some of the top artists in the country, because they would draw artists from around the country. So from that point of view, I was doing that for 3 years, and then my wife had the opportunity to get a PhD at Ohio State University, but someone had to work. So I wanted to support her, support that dream, and we had a young son, and still have a son, but he's not that young anymore. So I was invited to accept the executive director position of Pro Musica Chamber Orchestra in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay, wow.
So we went and did that.
So this is now becoming a métier professionally for you.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, I went from chamber music, which is a smaller ensemble, to a chamber orchestra, which is more like about 45 musicians. We were there for 3 years. My wife got her PhD, but the plan was never to settle necessarily in Columbus, Ohio, even though it actually is quite a sweet town, great town to raise a family. And I came back here because I'd lived in the Bay Area, you know, when that regional office story.
Right.
And some friends invited me to come back to celebrate my 50th birthday. So we came back, and we were in Marin and just fell in love again with Northern California. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to come back here if an opportunity arose? And shortly after that experience, about 3 months later, on our industry-wide orchestra listserv, I saw there was an opening for executive director of the Santa Rosa Symphony.
Wow, that's great.
And so that's how it happened.
So oftentimes when people think of arts organizations like the Symphony, you know, the big stars are the conductor, of course, or various musicians, that kind of thing. Being behind the scenes like that and really making it happen, what are some of the challenges you face?
Well,
I don't think people know that you exist in some ways, you know what I mean?
Well, I'll give you a quick story about that. You know, my son, who we would take to concerts all the time, you know, when he was about 8 years old, he said, "Dad, you're kind of the boss of the organization, aren't you?" And I said, well, kind of. And he said, "But you don't play a musical instrument, do you?" And I said, "No." And he says, "And you don't conduct, do you?" I said, "No." And he says, "So what do you do?" And really, people have always wondered that, and ergo the question you're now asking.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, the music director, who is the conductor, he's responsible for what you see on stage, in the sense of he's responsible for auditioning the musicians, for rehearsing them. He's responsible for putting together the programs. And I'm responsible for everything off stage. Okay. What that means is I oversee the marketing, the ticket sales. I oversee the donations, contributed revenue, strategic planning, public relations, working with the board, long-term planning. Those are all the things I'm responsible for. In a sense, you really need both. In the best of all possible worlds, the music director and the executive director are collegial and working well together, and we both report to a board of directors.
Well, let's talk about that relationship. So it's kind of a front of house, back of house kind of situation. What is that relationship like? I'm sure it's great. Obviously, we've been there a long time.
Yeah, I have been. And now I'm working with my second music director at the Santa Rosa Symphony. The first one was Jeffrey Kahane, who's well known to many people in the community, and then he moved on to the Colorado Symphony. And then Bruno Ferrandis, who's our current music director, now celebrating his 10th anniversary. And so I have a wonderful, I mean, I really am quite grateful for the relationship I have with Bruno. It's very collegial. And in a sense, you know, I often say if artistic excellence is the goal, if that's the only goal with an orchestra, it's fairly easy to accomplish, except it would cost so much money you'd be out of business in a few years. Right. And if fiscal vitality is the only goal, that's not too hard to do either. But you can't cost-cut your way to greatness. Right. So the real creative challenge for me and for the organization is how do you do both? How do you blend artistic excellence and fiscal vitality? And I think the way to do that is through community engagement, really being relevant to the community you're in. And so I'm working with Bruno constantly on that.
Well, what does that mean in this market? Is it a programmatic situation or is it a fundraising situation? I mean, probably both.
Well, in terms of community engagement, so for example, we've always had a core of our classical series, which speaks to classical, but we started to branch out in the past 10 years. We now have a pop series that draws in a different audience. We started a family concert series that's aimed at younger children and specifically for them. We have a partnership with the Sonoma County Library System where our musicians go out for free and perform in libraries around Sonoma County. We have partnerships with other nonprofits so that we're not just on stage, but we're also moving out into the community.
I mean, is there a mandate to make or to continue the relevance of classical music in that context in a community such as ours?
I think so. If you really want to not just survive but thrive, you've got to be engaged with the community. And so a big part of that is our commitment to music education, which is quite significant. Most professional orchestras have a youth orchestra. We happen to have 4. And in we have 4 different youth orchestras. And we have an enormous commitment to providing music in the schools, including our own sort of El Sistema program that came out of Venezuela.
So is this sort of stepping in where some of the schools, where the district perhaps can't engage students as
exactly. I mean, unfortunately, it's pretty widely known that the arts have been at a loss in terms of public funding, and so many orchestras have had to step in and fill that void, and we've definitely done that. We reach over 20,000 young people now every year through free concerts that we bring them to Weill Hall at the Green Music Center, to our groups going out to the various schools, and we have various programs, and we try to provide an intensive experience of music immersion, and we have schools apply for those programs that are free to them.
That's great. And Simply Strings is
Simply Strings is one of those major programs.
That's great.
At Shepherd Elementary School, and that's That's the El Sistema model, which is a pretty significant departure from the way music education was perceived. It's not just about developing people who appreciate classical music or become professional musicians in the future. It's really looking at bringing about positive social impact through music, which is pretty significant.
Let's come back to that in the next segment. We're with Alan Silow, the Executive Director of Santa Rosa Symphony. We'll be right back. And we're back with Alan Silow, the Executive Director of Santa Rosa Symphony. Where we left off in the last segment, we're talking about Simply Strings and a lot of the youth programs that you do. Kind of catch us back up to that if you can.
So with Simply Strings in particular, it takes this model that came out of Venezuela, whose most famous graduate is Gustav Dudamel, who you may know as the music director of the LA Philharmonic, but it's now throughout the country. And what it is at Shepherd Elementary, and that principal in the school there has made a major commitment in support of this, we are enrolling second graders through sixth graders in a everyday after school 2 hours each day for 24 weeks an intensive violin training. Wow. And it's not, again, so that they become professional musicians, but the idea is that they learn about what it means to be part of a team. They learn focus, they learn discipline. Of course, they learn about the music themselves, and we provide the teachers, the instruments, the family liaison, bilingual programs. And the idea is that will infuse not only their love of music, but they will be more academically accomplished, will keep them out of trouble, so to speak, and hopefully aspire them to love what they're doing.
I wonder, it seems like there's often an uphill battle to justify arts education in our schools. And do you find that by creating these programs that you have, that you've had to sell it to the powers that be or your funders or whomever as a way to enrich the culture at large, rather than just as music for its own sake? Or
well, actually, to some degree, it's a little hard sometimes to sell it to the schools because they are under such financial pressure to teach to test.
Right.
That even though, quote, it's free to them, that means they have to commit a certain amount of time and human resources. So for those schools that participate, it is a major commitment on their part.
I mean, so the perception would be that it's diverting from other things that could test well.
Exactly, exactly. But in terms of funders, I would say music education is an easier way to present to funders than necessarily underwriting a particular concert set.
Right.
It's easier actually because they all feel the need for developing young people's holistic training.
So I should start a music program here at CMedia, is what you're saying? Yeah,
exactly. Okay, but then you'd be in competition with us, so I don't know if that would be too good an idea.
We can partner. See,
partnership.
You heard it here first. Okay. So, well, speak back to your organization, music director. During the break, you talked about the potentiality for you're on the look for a new one. You're doing a search right now globally.
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. We're 88 years old. Which, by the way, makes us the third oldest professional orchestra in the state of California.
Oh, the orchestra is 88. Got it. Yeah.
Not me.
Yeah.
No, orchestra. Right. Yeah.
Just kidding.
And we've only had 4 music directors, which is pretty extraordinary. And Jeffrey Kahane was music director for 10 or 11 years.
Right.
And Bruno is celebrating his 10th anniversary this year. So typically, music directors after 10 to 12 years will feel it's time to move on, give the opportunity for the orchestra for a new leadership and for them to do other things.
So this is just an organic process?
Yeah, this is organic, and it was what Bruno wanted to do. And so we still love him, and he'll be with us for the next 2 seasons. So it's not something where we're looking to replace in the next 2 months or anything like that. He's given us enough lead time that we really can do it right.
But what is that process like, sourcing that caliber of talent? I mean, it is a global search. Am I correct?
It is an international search. I'm on the music director search committee. We have 10 people on the committee, 4 musicians from the orchestra, 5 board members, and myself.
And so, what do you look for?
Well,
where do you look, and what are you looking for, and where do you look?
Well, first of all, once the word gets out, we don't have to look too hard. Right. It's more like all the people coming in and saying they'd like to be considered. So we don't have to, it's not like we have to place an ad and hope somebody applies.
Right. No Craigslist listing for
that's right. There is no Craigslist listing for the music director. Because there are just not that many times an orchestra of our stature has a music director opening. So there's lots of conductors in this country and throughout. They're always looking for opportunities. And Sonoma County obviously is a very attractive place to live. So there's no dearth of applicants, that's for sure.
Okay.
And obviously what we're looking for is, on one level, we need someone who really can lead this orchestra in terms of continuing to raise its level of artistic excellence.
Yeah.
Who has innovative programming ideas, who also has a sensibility of what it means to work with the community, because that person's often the public face, and so someone who's a good communicator, a good public spokesperson, and of course somebody who works well with me. That's always important.
Right. And any other special characteristics you're looking for? Like a particular aesthetic or a particular, I mean, what is a Santa Rosa Symphony music director versus a music director for LA or Denver or any of another?
Well, you know, one major difference is probably 95% of the orchestras in this country, professionally speaking, are like ours, which is they're not full-time. So our music director, like our musicians, would not be full-time. In this state, there's 125 professional orchestras. Only the LA Philharmonic and San Francisco Symphony are full-time, meaning their musicians and their music director are totally focused on all the concerts that they do. So, you know, our music director would probably be with us about 10 weeks of the year. So it's also understood that they may be leading another orchestra, or they may be guest conducting elsewhere.
And that's just part of what it means to be a music director these days.
That's right.
Yeah. That's that word journeyman again. They're like, I mean, can you bear to have that person other places? I mean,
well, it's a good point. I mean, you know, when Jeffrey was with us, he was also music director of the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. So administratively, there was definitely a bit of juggling in terms of scheduling with that orchestra's needs and dates for Jeffrey as well as ours, and you find a way to work that out.
We've had Norman Gamboa on here. I'm not sure.
I do know Norman.
Yeah, he's great, but yeah, he's working in 3 different countries.
Exactly.
Simultaneously.
Well, same thing about our musicians. You know, semi-jokingly, oftentimes they're called members of the Freeway Philharmonic, because they're having to perform in many different orchestras in order to create a sustainable living wage. It's a challenge, without a doubt.
Optimally, would you want to be able to have them full-time?
No, because if we had a music director full-time, we would have to have a product line that justified it.
Right.
And that would be far beyond not only our own resources, but really there isn't a demand for a full-time orchestra in the North Bay. I mean, you know, you probably, well, I mean, like 200 performances is what we'd probably need to do.
Oh, wow.
You know, as I said, you're only looking at, as I've said, 5, you know, the LAs, the Chicagos, the New Yorks, the Philadelphias, they have full-time orchestras. Right. You have to be the best at what you are and know where you are in order to do well.
No, that's a very astute observation. I'm just wondering, do you foresee Santa Rosa ever changing, or its appetite for this kind of programming growing?
Oh, well, I think...
And isn't that your job to help you grow that? Or?
Well, I think you have to have what, you know, it's a sort of a...
I mean, you've calibrated
buzzword. It's a buzzword these days, the word sustainability.
Right.
And clearly what you want is sustainable growth. And that's what it's sustainable in terms of not burning out the resources that are available, and sustainable in terms of it still being a meaningful contribution to the musicians and to the community. And that's the challenge, is to find that, not growth for growth's sake at all.
Right. That is a very great observation. We've been speaking with Alan Silow, the Executive Director of Santa Rosa Symphony. I really appreciate you taking the time. I hope you come back.
Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, come back. Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Thank you.